Welcome to LFPL's At the Library series, an ongoing podcast featuring author talks, programs, and events at the Louisville Free Public Library. For more information about upcoming events, visit us online at www.lfpl.org/upcoming events.
Craig Johnson is originally from West Virginia. He's a Marshall University alumnus. I'm really nervous. You'll find out why in a moment. He's a Marshall University alumnus. He's been publishing for 20 years. How many of you have read all of his Longmire books so far? That's I gotta say, that is way more than I was expecting. I thought there would be a few hands go up, but that's really impressive. Yeah, you can count them twice. Number 20 is coming out. Do you know when? May 28th? All right. Okay. I just need to get out of the way. First Frost will be out May 28th. There's also a TV series ran A&E from 2012 to 2017. And how many of you have seen the TV? All right. I'm speechless, and I'm rarely speechless. Okay, so please welcome back to Louisville. This is his second time here at the library. Please join me in welcoming Craig Johnson.
Thanks, Lee.
Ordinarily, they're not going to stop applauding for you. Or you can clap for him again. We got one other thing to do. Ordinarily, at this point, I leave the stage, but I'm not tonight because we have a little bit of a surprise. And I can't really take credit for this, but I get to do this. But I have this envelope here, and inside the envelope, there is something that I have the pleasure. I hope it's not empty. Inside, there's something that I have the pleasure of presenting to you, which I think you're going to be really excited about. So many of you have heard of the Honorable Order of Kentucky Colonels. I myself am a Kentucky Colonel. There are some other Kentucky Colonels in the house tonight, including, I think, maybe a couple of acquaintances of yours, Hiram and Kate.
Oh, my goodness.
Are here. And
well, wait a minute. This sounds like one of those like one of those deals where,
this is your life?
No. Either that or I don't want to be a member of any club that would have me as a member.
Well, trust me, I got somebody in as a Kentucky Colonel once, and they said, so what does this mean? And I said, well, it means you're going to start getting invitations to donate money. So it is my pleasure to present you tonight with the certificate officially acknowledging your status as a Kentucky Colonel. So welcome to Louisville, Colonel Johnson.
Thank you. Now, does this mean if you guys have a war with Tennessee, I have to go fight? Is that what it means? This is like, wow, this is really impressive. My goodness, and everything. Look at that. It's right. I am. My gosh. Well, he's done more good than most of them anyway. So, oh, how wonderful. Thank you so much. This is so sweet. I'm gonna frame this up. Put it in my ranch, for goodness sake. Thank you. That's beautiful. Some of you were here when I came in. Do you know how many free libraries there are in Louisville? Do you know? So I hit the one down near Churchill Downs. That's what I did. I went to the wrong one because we were going through town, and I turned around, look at Judy, and I was like, I don't think the main library's in Tennessee. We're going along, and then I'm thinking to myself, did I put in Pellizzeri's Pizza in there instead? So we get down there, and I get out, and there's a security guy standing there. I thought, well, maybe it is the right one. It was a small library, and so I get out, and I walk over, and I go, hey, is this where Craig Johnson's supposed to be tonight? And he goes, oh, no, he's on York Street on the main library downtown. I was like, yeah, well, he's not there right now. So we jumped in the car and drove back as quick as we could. Louisville is one of my favorite towns in the whole world. I love this town. I spent about a year here one time, working as a writing, whatever it was, with a playwright with Actors Theater of Louisville, which is where I did a lot of my work developing dialogue. I'm working on that. And then I've had some really good stories too. I'm going to take this thing off. Do you guys mind? Like, is that going to bother you? Okay, it's it's a little bit warm like that for us Wyomingans here. And anyway, like that, and I don't even have to stand next to that because I've got this, Taylor Swift headgear here, that I can like wander around with like that. And I'll end up tripping over that before it's all over with too. Look at so. Anyway, now that I'm all prepared here, like this is one of my favorite Louisville stories. Like Judy and I, my wife, we were coming through town, and we were going down the highway, and at that point in time, this was like 35 years ago or something. And anyway, we're coming down through, and it was getting late at night. And I looked, and there was a big billboard, and what was happening was the Brown Hotel was getting a makeover, they were redoing it and everything here about 30, 35 years ago. And so, I look at Judy and I said, hey, because I can't remember what the rooms were. The rooms were like down to $49 or something like that. And I was like, let's stay at the Brown. Let's go. And so we did. We pulled off, went in there. And they were redoing it and everything. And so you had to walk by the drywall and all this stuff and we get up there to the main entryway and I check in at the desk and, talking to the woman there at the front desk and everything like that, and I happened to look behind and on the mezzanine, and I don't know if it's still there or not. I bet there was the stairs leading up the mezzanine, and then there used to be a little bar over in the corner there. And I looked over and I said, "Wow, with a hotel this big, that's the bar?" And she goes, "Oh no, that's our bourbon bar. That's nothing but Kentucky bourbon in that bar." And I was like, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah." And so anyway, I get the key and I turn around, and I start marching up the steps, with our bags in my hand. And Judy says, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Do you see that little guy up there? He knows all about bourbon. We don't know anything about bourbon, so we should go talk to him." And so we get up the steps and we get up there, and I swear this guy looked like he'd been there since Prohibition, I swear. And we get there, a little tiny little guy, and we walk up and I walk up to him and I said, "My good man, what's the finest bourbon you've ever had?" He said, "That would be the Pappy Van Winkle's Family Reserve, sir, the 23-year-old. And I said, "Well, I think we better have some." And he looks at my scuffed up cowboy boots. He looks at my holes in my blue jeans and the shiny elbows in my snap front shirt and my beat up cowboy hat. And he goes, "It's $50 a tumbler, sir." Well, he'd obviously never dealt with a cowboy before. So I looked him right in the eye and said, "I guess you better make it two." And Judy about had a heart attack because the truck I was driving wasn't worth $100, for God's sakes. So, but we made it out of there. It was really funny because that was the bourbon that I had Lucian have in that corner, cabinet that he's got at the Home for Assisted Living, And it was so funny because that was, when I first started writing the books 20 years ago, the first book, The Cold Dish, it was still kind of unknown at that point in time. It was really kind of fun because I'd paid my $50 for a tumbler and shared it with my wife. So I thought, that really wasn't too bad. And I thought that sheriff would have something like that would be, really unique, And then I don't know what it was. At something maybe about a year or two later, the New York Times came out with a list of the 10 top bourbons of the century, and that was one of them. And then the Wall Street Journal came out with the top 10 bourbons of the century. It was one of them. And suddenly I couldn't touch the stuff for love nor money And so I kind of had to give up on it a little bit there. But it was kind of funny because the head distiller actually wrote me here, and this was about 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, wrote me and said, "Thank you so much, for promoting our product." And I was like, "Well, evidently I did too good of a job because I can't afford it anymore." And so and I got one more alcohol story, and then I'll quit. I'll move on from there. So, this is a funny one too, because I had the beer that Walt drinks, the Rainier beer. It's kind of funny, because every once in a while I'll get an email from people that'll say, "Did you know that Rainier beer is real?" I'm like, yeah. So anyway, when I was trying to find a signature, beer for Walt, that seemed to be the one. But it was funny because I just got finished here just earlier this year doing the Western Heritage Award down at the Cowboy Hall of Fame. And Lou Diamond Phillips, got inaugurated and so it was kind of wonderful like that. But I got to do the introduction, for him, which is always dangerous because I know all kinds of stories about Lou And so anyway, they had us up there, and one of the first things they tell you, it's in this great big huge hall, and they've got a jumbotron behind you. And I'd never, been around one of those things before And so the first thing that they tell you is don't look at it because it'll weird you out, okay? And I was like, I don't believe that. Like, and so we were doing the rehearsal part. Thank goodness it was during the rehearsal, and I'm talking and everything. And I glanced back and I was like, holy crap. And anyway, it was the guy I was doing it with was Wyatt McCrae, who is, do you remember Joel McCrae? Remember the old actor, Joel McCrae? He did all those cowboy roles. It was his grandson is the one that I was doing the event with. He was my co-sponsor for the award. And, we're talking away and doing all the stuff, and we're, where we're supposed to move to and when we're supposed to hand Lou, the award and all this stuff like it. And so we got the dress rehearsal all done, and we get ready to come down off the steps. We come down off the steps, and there's this tall cowboy, and he's there at the center table there, and he's making sure all of the name places, place names are all correct, and all of it's a big table. It's got like 24 people at, and he's making sure all of the names are all in the right places and all this kind of stuff. And he's wearing this bright white, 50 million X hat and everything. And so as I'm walking by, he looks over at me and he goes, Craig Johnson. And I turn around and I go, yes, sir. And he looks at me and he goes, Longmire. And I said, yes, sir. And then he makes this face and he goes, Rainier. I didn't know him from Adam, and so I just nodded my head and said, yep, kept right on walking, I get to the door, and Wyatt McCrae is right beside me, and he's dying laughing as we make it out into the lobby. And he looks at me and he goes, you don't know who that is, do you? And I said, no, I don't. He goes, that's Pete Coors. Probably not going to get that sponsorship real soon, I don't think. But anyway, that was, kind of how things started out for me. This is the joy of being in a library like that, because Walt Longmire, if you haven't noticed in the books, is kind of haunted by books. He was an English major at USC, his office is an old Carnegie library, defunct Carnegie library. And, I knew that, when I was putting Walt together, I had to give him a couple of, superpowers. There's a couple of superpowers that would keep him alive and get him through all the horrible things that I was going to do to him. And one of them is he reads. He reads everything, and he remembers it. And only those of us who do read, realize how much of an advantage that is, and what an enjoyment and an asset in our lives like that. And so anyway, whenever I had my first book come out, The Cold Dish, it was really wonderful. Got really good reviews and sold really well. But the big excitement was I had the first library that I'd ever had get in touch with me. And it was a little town over in the western part of Wyoming called Meeteetse, which has a population of about 327. So that's a big town in Wyoming. And so, they called, and it was email. It was an email. And Dinah Chapman, who was the librarian there, she wrote me like that, and she said, hey, we just read your book, The Cold Dish, and we just love it. Is there any way that we can get you to come over and do a library event, with us like that? And, I'd never been asked to do anything in a library other than so I was, kind of excited. And I was like, absolutely, I'll be delighted to like that. And she wrote me back 3 minutes later and said, just so you know, we're just a little branch library in Park County over here out of Cody, and we don't have a lot of money for honorarias or anything like that. And so I quick looked up what an honoraria was, and I wrote her back, and I said, well, once you reach a certain level of literary notoriety, it's very difficult to negotiate your own honorarium. Mine's the same as it's always been, a 6-pack of Rainier beer cans preferred, like that. And she wrote me back 2 minutes later and said, done. The problem was that ended up in all of the newspapers in Wyoming. And so subsequently, I have done all 63 of the libraries in Wyoming. That's right. And before you applaud my selflessness, you should know I haven't bought beer in 17 years or something like that. So it's been mutually beneficial for both parties and everything. And the real funny part was, let me tell you how much librarians like bringing beer into their libraries. I was doing, I had a little novella called Spirit of Steamboat, and it was the first read for the state of Wyoming. And I'm really proud of that, because I felt good about that. Thought the little book had something to say that was strong and good and decent, And anyway, they invited me down to the state library, and the state librarian was there, and the governor and the AG and everybody. And the state librarian comes out to the podium, and she had a 12-pack of Rainier beer like that. But it was wrapped up in brown paper with packing tape and twine and everything. It looked like heroin is what it looked like when she brought it out there. And she brings it out and she sets it on the podium and she looks at me and goes, this was really kind of hard to get. And I was like, well, yeah, I know. I mean, it's kind of a working class, blue collar beer. A lot of bars don't carry it anymore. And she goes, no, you don't understand. The distributors had a hard time getting it. And I was like, well, yeah, if the bars don't carry it, the distributors don't have it. She goes, no, you still don't understand. They're out of beer. This was 2 weeks into the TV show Longmire. Everybody, they saw Walt drinking it. They all went out and bought it. I don't know if they drank it, but they bought it. I thought, I thought this sounds a little funny. I'm going to check this out. And so I call up, their headquarters. It was in, Washington State, in Seattle. And I call them up. I call up the PR department. And I call them up and I said, hey, are you guys? And this guy goes, we are out of beer. We have been brewing this stuff since Prohibition broke, and we've had a spike in sales unlike anything we've ever had before, and we have no idea what's going on. And I was like, well, we have what we call in my line of business a clue. So I started telling him about Walt Longmire, the sheriff of the least populated county, least populated state, and how there are these series of books, now that there's a television show and all of this stuff. We're having a really nice conversation, we're going along there. And finally we get to the end of the conversation. And he goes, well, now don't worry because we're in full production. So it'll be back out on the shelves here in about 2 weeks. Which kind of gives you an indication of how long it takes to make Rainier beer, I mean, if you're thinking it's aging in fine oak casks, up in ice caves of the Olympic Peninsula, you need to rethink that because that's not the case at all. But that was probably one of the strangest things that ever happened in my life. I have to admit, that TV show kind of happened. And it was strange because I remember talking to some of the other guys that had movies and TV shows done. I remember talking to Lee Child about it, Michael Connelly. And I remember Lee saying that, he said, he said, they will write you a check and they will slide it across the table. And that's the last you'll hear from them. That'll be the end of it. Okay. And I was like, okay, that's all right. I don't mind people sliding checks toward me. I don't mind that at all. And he goes, he says, yeah, he says, you might recognize it. You might not recognize it. I don't know. And I said, okay, all right. And so I thought I kind of dodged a bullet. I just thought, okay, I'll get paid, but and I can just see what happens with it. And then they started asking me questions. They said, well, Craig, have you ever thought about actors whenever you think about Walt Longmire? And I said, no, I've got friends and family and people I've worked with, and I use them as characters in my books. One of my favorite quotes about writing is the one from Wallace Stegner on writing and teaching fiction, where he says the greatest piece of fiction ever written is the disclaimer at the beginning of every novel that says nobody in this book is based off anybody alive or dead. And what a crock that is. I mean, that's your job, to go find interesting people and put them in your books. If you talk to me for more than 30 seconds, you're taking your literary life in your hands, just so you know. And so anyway, they said, well, do you ever think about and I said, no, I don't. And they said, well, if you did think about actors, when you think about Walt Longmire, who do you think about? And I said, I'm not, and I said, Joel McCrae. Joel McCrae would be a good Walt Longmire. Gary Cooper would be a good Walt Longmire. Ben Johnson would be a fantastic Walt Longmire. And they looked at me and they said, Craig, those people have been dead for 60 years. That's not particularly helpful. And so I was like, well, I'm just not going to be much help to you guys because I just don't watch that much TV or see that many movies or anything like that. And so I thought I'd gotten off the hook. I thought I'd survived it, right? And so then we were sitting out at the ranch, in our little town of Ucross, Wyoming, population 26. It's gone up 1 in 40 years. So the boom is what it is. So anyway, we're sitting there one night. It's 8 o'clock at night, and somebody comes up the ranch road. And, people don't come up the ranch road at 8 o'clock at night out where we are. And it's Randy, my FedEx guy. And Randy pulls around and stops and he gets out. And I walk out on the porch thinking, what's wrong? And I walk out there and he looks at me and he's got this box in his hands. He's coming up the steps and he looks at me. He goes, Craig, he says, it's an overnight package from Warner Brothers. And then he shakes it and he goes, I think it's DVDs. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think you're supposed to do that, Randy. So he hands me the box, and I turn around to go back in. He starts following me as I'm going into the kitchen. And I said, I got this, Randy. I got it. It's okay. He said, let me know what it is. And I'm like, okay, I will. I promise. So I get inside, and I open up the box. I pull that little strip thing off, and it dumps out 30 DVDs on the kitchen table. And it was all the auditions for all the actors that they were considering for Walt Longmire. And I had to, I looked at it, like I looked at Judy and I said, well, I guess we got some homework to do like that. And so I'm standing there and I'm putting these DVDs in and we're trying to, see which guy we think will be the best, Walt Longmire, as I'm feeding these DVDs in. And they had two different ways they could go with the television show. They could either go with somebody who was a big name, that would draw an audience, to the show, or they could go with someone who was relative unknown. And there are kind of problems with both of those. There's good things and bad things with both those directions. But one of them is like, if they went with a big name, they would draw an audience, but the problem is that, you guys know as well as I do that there are about 6 guys that when the character wears one of these, they get that role over and over and over again. And they're all wonderful performers, but for my money, they've kind of gone to the well one time too many. So I was kind of hoping for the new guys, what I was kind of hoping for. But there's problems with that too, like that, because Walt Longmire, in the books, Walt's a Vietnam veteran, like it. And so, any actor that was going to play Walt was going to have to be like 50, 60 years old, right? Like that. Well, if you're an actor in Hollywood and you're 50 or 60 years old and you're still unknown, you might suck, and they're real nervous about the whole suck thing like that. And so I was just waiting to see how they were going to play it and what was going to happen. And so we're watching all these guys attempt to be Walt Longmire, and it was fun. People always ask, they say, what's that like? Like, and the only way that I can describe it is it's like coming down for breakfast one morning and having a house plant start talking to you is what it's like. It's really wonderful, but it's really weird too. Like, and so anyway, we're watching all these guys attempt to be Walt Longmire like that, and some of them are doing better than others and all of this like that, but none of them are really clicking. None of them are really doing it for me. And so I'm watching all these guys like it, and finally I get to the last one, the last DVD, and I pull it out and it says Robert Taylor on it. And I look at Judy and I said, well, they took my advice after all, didn't they? Like, thank God some of you laughed. The young under 30 crowd does not get the Robert Taylor joke at all. Again, I got to tell you. And so I put the DVD in. Like, this guy comes in. He's a big guy. He's about 6'4", about 230, like that, but he's got these lines on his face. Like that. He's got this gravelly voice and everything. Like, he's what I tend to refer to as good sheriff DNA is what he had. Like it. And so I'm thinking, this guy looks pretty good. Like it. And he starts talking and everything. And in the audition, what it was it's in the pilot episode, Walt's going to do a notification of death. And in law enforcement, it's the worst job in the world. Basically, what you're doing is going to a stranger's home and telling them that they are never going to see their loved one again. It's just the worst job in the world. Walt's never met this woman before. He's never been in her home. And Robert Taylor was the only actor that did this, took his hat off. I was like, that's our guy. His mom taught him basic decency. We don't have to start from scratch. So I'm feeling really good about Robert Taylor. And it was about then that my wife, Judy, sitting behind me went, oh my. You turn around, I look at her, and she goes, he's handsome. Then she made it worse. She goes, you know what? He's kind of like a TV version of you, taller, better looking, with a better voice. Like, and so I'm not as big of a fan of Robert Taylor as I used to be, like I have to admit. But I love the TV show. It's wonderful like that. But for me, it's always going to come back to the books. Like the books are the most important thing to me. The books were around about 7 years, before the TV show came to life like that. And it's wonderful because the TV show has brought in an awful lot of people that may not have known that Walt Longmire existed. And I'm going to do you guys, this is going to be fun. Like, and I think I'm going to give you a vote. But I think you're probably going to go the way I think you're going to go like that. I'm going to do a little reading and talk a little bit about Longmire Defense, but then I'm also going to do the very first reading of First Frost, which comes out on the 28th. Like that, and you will be the very first audience for that sequence. Like that's the good news. Now the bad news: you will be the very first to hear the reading from First Frost. Like that. So if it doesn't sound very good, don't judge me too harshly. All right, is all I can ask. Like that. The fun of these books is that I like using like newspaper articles, and things like that to get ideas for these books like that. And this one was no different. Like that, there was a really wonderful Elmer Keith like that piece like that he wrote about up in Montana where a guy got accidentally killed like that, and I just that story haunted me. For decades it haunted me, and I thought, what, that's a Walt Longmire story is what that is. And so in the Longmire Defense, what it is that happens is that Walt's on a search and rescue up in the Bighorn Mountains. And there's a woman that's like crashed her car, like and got away from her car, and they've got to try and find her before it gets dark and gets really cold. And it's snowy and all of this, like that. And they get up there like that. And Walt has a brainstorm and figures out nobody ever gets lost going uphill. They always get lost going downhill. And so he, goes and he finds this woman, and they're out in the middle of nowhere, of course, like in Wyoming, like that. And Walt's two-way radio doesn't have the range. He can't get a hold of anybody, so he has to borrow her cell phone and climb up on a big rock, outcropping to try and see if he can hold it just right, to be able to get it to work. And he gets up on this rock outcropping, and he's looking around after he finishes talking to Game and Fish and Search and Rescue, and he's looking around and he's thinking to himself, I know this place. Excuse me, I've been to this place before, someday, somewhere, sometime. And then he remembers what it was, this is his grandfather's elk camp, is what it is. And he remembers that this was the spot where his father told him about the first time he'd ever seen a man die, is what it was. And what had happened was there was this fellow by the name Bill Sutherland, who was the state accountant, and he'd just gotten back from World War II, late 1940s, and he'd called and said, hey, I just want to go up in the mountains and go on an elk hunt and just kind of clear my head if I can, like that. Do you mind if I come up and stay at your elk camp? And they invited him up and said, absolutely, come on ahead. Well, he gets up there, and in the hunt, he gets killed. And they can't find the weapon that did it. It was kind of an experimental weapon at that period in time, a caliber that not many people have. It was a 300 H&H Weatherby Magnum is what it was. There was only a couple. As a matter of fact, Weatherby, I believe, was the only ones that actually made that particular action, that caliber at that point in time. And they never found the weapon, so they didn't know who it was that had killed him, if it was meant to be or it was an accident. So anyway, Walt's looking around, and all of a sudden he hears a noise. He looks down, and Dog is down over the hill, digging in the rocks. And so he yells at Dog, says, get away from there, before a marmot comes out and bites your nose off. And Dog raises his head up, and he's got this leather strap in his mouth. And it could be a piece of horse tack. It could be a rifle sling. And so Walt climbs down, moves some of the rocks, gets his arm down in there and pulls out a 300 H&H Weatherby Magnum. And I like to think of Walt as being one of the most ecumenical, fair-minded detectives that there is. I mean, he's a firm believer in the maxim, innocent until proven guilty, until he discovers that this weapon belonged to his grandfather, Lloyd Longmire. And if you've read the books, you know that Walt and his grandfather have a really kind of a rough relationship. And so for the first time, it sure seems like Walt's really kind of going after his grandfather in this particular book. Would you like to hear a little bit of that? I've got a little sequence here like that. It's actually a chess game is what it is, like that. And I think that there was a reason, but I'll talk about that afterwards. And so we get to meet Walt's grandfather as he and his grandson are playing chess. So I hope you'll enjoy this. Which one are you? Excuse me? My grandfather sat there in his ornate leather straight-backed chair, his gnarled hands matching the lion claws that clutched at the globes on the ends of the armrests. Which one of these pieces is you? I sat there with my legs dangling from my own chair, my arms folded on the table with my chin resting on them, looking at the chess set from a worm's eye view. I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? I stared at the board, the myriad of pieces there. Not any of them. I'm me. He reached over in order to take a tumbler of the amber-colored liquid. That's why you're going to lose. I thought it was because you were better than me. He leaned forward, his craggy face highlighted by the vertical light of the Tiffany lamp. Oh, I am, but there's a reason. In a bacon and egg breakfast, do you know the difference between the chicken and the pig? No, sir. That chicken's involved, but that pig... He raised a bushy eyebrow that made him look even more like a wizened old owl. Now that pig, he's committed. He sat the glass down and studied me with those gray eyes, gray like an oncoming storm. Have you ever heard the term skin in the game? No, sir. It means that you have something to lose. I slumped back in my oversized chair. It's just a game. Listen up. What if it wasn't? He placed the leather elbow pads of his hunting shirt on the edge of the table, cradling his chin in his interlaced fingers. You start disregarding the challenges in your life, and you end up disregarding your life as a whole. It becomes a habit. You catch my drift? What, so I have to pretend like everything that I do is important? Oh, no. No, you can go through life as a trifling man. Do you know what that means? Trifling? Not important? Close, but more like insignificant, inconsequential, frivolous, or small. You want to lead a small life, Walter? I don't think so. You don't think about something like that. You need to know. Ella Onehart entered from the main hall, bringing me a root beer on a silver serving tray, carefully placing a linen napkin down before putting the frosted bottle on the leather surface of the partner's desk. She glanced sideways at my grandfather. Are you torturing the boy? He sat back looking at her. I'm teaching him. Hard to tell the difference the way that you do it. I liked Ella. Heck, I loved Ella. She always called me the boy, but it wasn't demeaning the way she said it. It was more like a title, more like royalty. She draped one of her thick arms over the back of my chair. It's after the boy's bedtime. Staying up a little late won't hurt him any. His mother might think so. His mother be damned. She stared at him in a way that nobody else did, and I never knew why it was she got away with it, but she did. I'm fixing to go home, Mr. Longmire. So, somebody will need to show the boy to his bed. What, he can't find it on his own? Her hand came down and ruffled my hair. Given the chance, he'll stay up all night, just like my granddaughter. We'll let him. Mr. Longmire. All right, all right. You give us 10 minutes to finish our game? We just got started, sir. I will be done with you in 10 minutes, young lad. He sometimes called me young lad, but it was different than the boy that Ella used. Ella sighed and started off towards the kitchen. 10 minutes. He shook his head at her and then tapped a fingertip on the tiny horse near the corner of the board. Do you know what that is? It's a knight. Very good. Chess is based on an Indian game that it's a piece that's the oldest defined and most unique. He tapped the horse again. That is you. A knight? He nodded. It might not be who you are forever, but it's who you are now. Most versatile piece on the board. It can move in 8 different directions over any obstacles, always unexpected. I studied the board in front of me. And the king? That's me. Confused, I studied the piece. But it's not the most powerful. No. Then why aren't you the queen? He chuckled, glancing towards the kitchen where Ella was singing a song in Crow. Well, you have to have something to aspire to in life. I moved my bishop. Is that a small life or a big life? You tell me. I studied the piece out in the corner and then pondered what it was he was saying. Why a knight? Your job so far is to threaten and protect the monarch. He slid his queen along the side of the board. I thought that was the king. That comes later. What's a king without a throne? A knight. And a knight without a horse? I moved my knight, taking a pawn. A pawn. Very good, Walter. Picked up a glass and took another sip. Don't ever aspire to be a pawn. I thought about it. Why am I the one to do the protecting? He stood, pushing his chair back in order to walk past me and pluck an iron from the rack and poke at the logs that were crackling in the fire. Building a home is one of the greatest things that you'll ever do in a lifetime. He glanced at the portrait of the lovely woman above the fireplace. Do you remember your grandmother? No, sir. He nodded. You were only about 2 when she passed. He turned, studying the dark paneled walls, the oriental carpets, the moss rock fireplace where the logs flamed, banked against the fire. Why do you think that I built this place? Because you could? No, something more than that. He looked back at the painting of my grandmother. You know, I used to think that I did it for her, but I don't think that was the case. He didn't move for a moment. A man has got to stand for something in this world. He has to make a mark, and there are as many ways of doing that as there are men. But I chose to build something with this ranch, something that I hope will last. I glanced around with him. It's a pretty fancy place. Fancy. Yes, sir. I think steadfast is the word you're looking for. But nonetheless, wood warps and decays, rock falls away. These things don't last forever, at least not without care. Who do you think I built this place for? Yourself? Yeah, partially. He laughed. You know I'm not going to be around forever, right? That I'm going to die someday? I guess. You guess. It's kind of hard for me to imagine, sir. Oh, good. I'd rather you not summon up the image too clearly too soon. He moved past me, looking at the bookshelves. How old are you, Walter? 9, sir. Do you ever suppose that you'll amount to much? I swallowed, trying to be honest. I don't know, sir. You don't know. He sighed and then returned to the board and then sat, extending that same finger in order to make a decisive move with his queen. Check. He is. He is a rough old cob, and I think that that in many ways that this chessboard is the one place where the two of them could meet on equal terms. And I don't think that Lloyd was really torturing Walter by teaching him how to play chess and playing chess with him. I think what he had in mind was he was trying to train Walt's mind, is what he was trying to do. He kind of thought, okay, like that. And I think that as Walt progressed as a detective, at that ability to be able to be 8, 9, 10, 12 moves ahead of your opponent, kind of came to serve him like that. Because I really do think that Walt Longmire is kind of a world-class detective. I think he's every bit of a Sherlock Holmes. He just happens to live in the least populated county and least populated state. And so anyway, Now, before we get to the Q&A part, do you want me to read the part from First Frost after the Q&A, or do you want me to read it before? What would you prefer? Before? Okay, all right, that's what I'll do then. All right, this one's it's another flashback a little bit like that. It kind of bounces back and forth between current times, and I can't tell you about that part unless you've read the Longmire Defense, so I don't want to ruin that for anybody like that. But then it also bounces back to 1964 is what it is like that. And what's happening at this point in time is Walt and Henry are graduating from college. It's 1964 like that. And, they're graduating from college and they just, they're going to receive these, lovely invitations from the federal government, inviting them on a lovely vacation in sunny Southeast Asia in a little known country called Vietnam like that. And so, they've got this one last, big fling that they've got. They're going to go on this big road trip like that because Henry has to go to Fort Polk, Louisiana, Tigerland, which kind of gives you an indication of what his military service is going to be like. And Walt has to go to Parris Island, all the way off the coast of South Carolina, which is kind of odd because if you know anything about the Marine Corps, Eastern Marines are the ones that go to Parris Island like that, and Western Marines go down 29 Palms to San Diego. And so the big question becomes, why would Walt be going to the Eastern Marines to get booked in like that? And if you read very carefully in Longmire Defense, you might pick a little bit of the reason up like that, but I'm not going to tell you any more than that. Of course, the big question becomes, you're getting ready to take a big epic road trip in 1964. What road do you go on? Route 66, right? So here they are. They're 22 years old. They've been playing college football for the last 4 years. They're in the greatest shape of their lives. Like, they're 22 years old, so they're not very smart. And so the big question becomes, they take off on this epic road trip on Route 66, and how far do they get before they get into trouble? I will let you find out on May 28th. Not very far at all. They hardly make it into Arizona. So anyway, you guys ready? Here we go. I'll start from the very beginning of this particular, not right at the very beginning, but the first section that takes place in 1964. And of all places, Walt Longmire is sitting beside his surfboard in Malibu in 1964 at the beach like that. And so talk about a strange occurrence like that. And so here we go. Friday, May 22nd, 1964. You're too big to surf, man. Looking at the chop waves rolling in past Point Doom near Malibu as the sun got shouldered out by the grim-looking clouds above the vast Pacific Ocean, I leaned my back against the still warm wall of Marvelous Marv's snack bar and let the heat there relax my sore muscles, a trick I'd learned from Henry. What do you know, Marv? You don't surf. Marvelous Marv was a transplant from Jamaica, having given up his island paradise on the California coast, and specifically Malibu Point. His snack bar was an on-again, off-again operation in a particularly crumbling structure of cement block on Pirates Cove Beach that everybody was pretty sure he'd acquired because the previous owner had abandoned it. Truth to be told, nobody knew his real name, but Marvelous Marv was painted on the side of the weathered white building in a sweeping turquoise script, so the name had stuck. With dreadlocks and a crocheted hat, he served up the cold drinks, chips, ice cream that wasn't so hot, and from what I was to understand, the finest lamb's breath marijuana ever smoked by man. Personally, I'd tried the stuff only once, but got nothing more than a headache and went back to beer. I turned towards the ocean, aware that in 4 years it hadn't lost any of its fascination for me. Maybe because when the wind blew across the grasslands of the high plains, the whole world felt alive. And the same could be said about the Pacific. The thing about the ocean was that it never was the same. Whether it was the north swell or the rip curls off the point, it was always different. I guess that over time, I never again saw the sea as an adversary, but rather as an intimate companion. Ain't nobody should be surfing out there today, man. He turned and raised the volume of his tiny transistor radio behind him, bringing in the throaty voice of Richie Barrett singing Some Other Guy, one of the Cheyenne favorites. He looked up at the darkening skies and then at the chop of the waves and the checkered flag that the local meteorologist had placed on top of the rock cairn at the point, signaling danger at the mainly fishing vessels that hugged the coast, rounding the point. Hey, Marv, when did that boat go down last year? About 9 months ago, man. That Siesta Royale, working boat. She took 8 souls with her. Marvelous crossed himself and then stared down at the scaly painted surface of the counter that spanned the only window in the snack bar. Hey, man, why don't you buy a candy bar or something? I got Baby Ruth. Not hungry. He nodded, giving up on the sale and looking out to sea. Where's that good-looking girl that you used to hang with? Rachel? I pointed to the 2 fearless individuals who waited on a set not too far out, biding their time in the rising storm to catch just one more maxed-out curl on the beach. Over there, with Henry. Marv shook his head. That bear, man, he crazy. I thought about the celebratory trips the Cheyenne Nation and I had taken down to Tijuana and how many drunken brawls we barely escaped with our lives. Sometimes, yeah. How long he been surfing? I thought about when the bear had come down from Berkeley. About a month now. He finished up early, and to be honest, I think they were happy to get rid of him. He majored in political science, but I think he spent more time at protests and sit-ins than he did in class. Protesting the war? Yep. But it looks like he's going to be a part of it anyway. He nodded. You're good on that board. Simple, old-fashioned style, drawing long lines with perfect balance, big man. But that bear, he looked like he'd been doing it his whole life. I sighed. Yeah, he's kind of a natural athlete. Sensing my feelings of inadequacy, Marv threw me a bone. Hey, congratulations on that fruit bowl that you won, man. Rose Bowl. Yeah, that a big deal, man? I guess. You're going to play more of that football? No. Both Henry and I graduated and lost our deferment, so we enlisted. He slid down the heavy sunglasses on his nose and looked at me. Enlisted? Yeah, before we could get drafted. He shoved the glasses up on his middle finger and looked back out on the threatening ocean where Rachel and the bear finally caught what looked to be a premium wave as it feathered, the crests throwing spray as the swells steepened. They had a hard time finding the line, then suddenly the wave looked bigger and got more frightening. They got that football up in Canada, too. I nodded, pressing my back against the blocks and sliding up to a standing position so I could watch them better. No, but that won't be the direction we'll be going. Mexico? The long period glassy and gray swell lifted them as they stood on their boards. No, Henry's supposed to go to Fort Polk, someplace called Tigerland in Louisiana, and I'm supposed to go to Paris Island in South Carolina for some reason. I watched as the questioned look came returned to his face, and I figured I'd cut it off at the pass. If you're a Marine in the western part of the state, you go to 29 Palms down the road here. And if you're from the eastern part of the country, you go to Paris Island in South Carolina. But ain't you a cowboy, man? My 2 closest friends were silhouettes now, backlit by the one glimmer of the gray sun that threw a shard of mercury light between them and the closing clouds. Their boards carved like dark blades, slashing and gliding along as their balanced feet, as Rachel effortlessly cut back behind the bear. I am, but for some reason they want me to go to Paris Island. So we've got a road trip ahead of us, starting tomorrow. He shrugged. That should be fun. It was a perfect wave to finish the season, a gift sent by the sea gods with glowing hooks and tall shoulders, a day of glory on Big Wednesday. Yeah, it's kind of our last hurrah. How long that trip going to take? 4 or 5 days in my ranch truck. You need some money? I turned to look at him, aware that in the 4 years that I'd known him, I'd never heard him offer a loan to anybody. No, I think we're good. But thanks, Marv. We both watched as Henry and Rachel made the beach and stumbled onto the sand of the all but empty stretch. Usually the pit, as we called it, was full of the surfing royalty, but with the weather being the way it was, the majority had decided to give the middle of the week a pass. Giving each other a high five, they turned to wave to Marv and me, and I waved back, relieved that they'd made it to the shore and that they'd gotten one last magnificent sunset ride. Rachel had been born here in Southern California, and of course, Henry, even though a native of the High Plains, had taken to the sport like surf wax. As for my college years had gone by, I'd found myself spending more and more time at the beach, trapped between two worlds, one on land and the other in the ocean. I guess it wasn't an abnormality, and that 9 times out of 10, when you ask somebody from my home state which branch of the service they'd been in, they generally said the Navy. I explained part of the thrall. A kid from a landlocked state who till 4 years ago had never even seen the ocean. During football season, my time was pretty much spent out on my own. But in the off season, I'd find myself loading up my board, the monolith, as Henry referred to it, and heading up the Pacific Coast Highway to the ranch truck my parents had bequeathed me. Sometimes I crammed, sometimes I've slept on the bed in the 2-ton truck, and sometimes I'd spring for a cheap motel where Rachel and I would ride our own waves. I'd first met Rachel Wiseman as a literature class when we'd sparred off on Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. I'd say it was a spectacular treatise on morality, and she'd say it was the most moribund and depressing declination of a novel she'd ever read. I'd never met anybody that used the 2 words moribund and declination in the same sentence. And we never agreed on the subject of Dostoevsky, but we both respected each other's ardor concerning the written word. We slept together that weekend and had been a couple for nearly 3 years. I'd even brought her back to Wyoming, where my parents had fallen madly in love with her, but things had changed since I'd enlisted. I told her I wasn't comfortable extending the relationship into my military service, and I didn't want her to be stuck with a guy who she would be lucky if she'd even see in the next 4 years, if at all. She argued that we were already a couple and that allowing something arbitrary like the Vietnam War to break us up just seemed stupid. My response was that the Vietnam War was about to become anything but arbitrary for me, and we had not met with a great deal of benevolence. I have to tell you, like, and this is, why it is that I've done this. I've been doing a lot of interviews lately, and people are like, "Wow, 20 books! Wow, two novellas, another one coming out in November. That'll be 3 novellas, another collection of short stories, 2 collections of short stories. That doesn't seem like a lot to me. I guess I'm having a good time. I have to admit, like that, because I'm just enjoying it. I really am. I guess the best part about it is that whenever people ask me about the TV show in Hollywood and all that stuff, I'm like, well, yeah, they've got some advantages. They've got all these millions of dollars and these movie stars and all that kind of stuff. But there's the one thing that they don't have that I do. It's called the reader's imagination, is what it's called. And for me, that's the greatest thing in the world, like that, because all I do is I'm a wordsmith. I take the words and I line them up just like dominoes, right? Standing up. Like in that first chapter, I nudge over that first one, and those words go into your imagination, and you do all of my heavy lifting for me. And for that, I thank you. Thank you. All right, now's your chance. You can ask some questions. We've got if you're loud enough, I can try and repeat the question. And but if you don't, you can also go over to the microphone over here. Yes, ma'am. Oh, this is an endless list. It just goes on forever. I'm trying to think of the ones that I mentioned. I've got an interview that's coming out in the New York Times. There's a little section in the New York Times book review called "By the Book," and so one of the things they asked is they said, there were a couple of different ones. One question was what would you like to see made into a movie, a book that's not been done? And I said, Brady Udall's The Miracle Life of Edgar Mint. It's a really fantastic book. If you haven't read that, look it up. Brady Udall, The Miracle Life of Edgar Mint. And what it's about this kid on an Indian reservation in the Southwest who climbs. He's really curious, and he climbs underneath a Jeep, male Jeep, and the guy doesn't know he's underneath there and drives off and runs over his head. And he survives, and the guy that runs over his head goes nuts because he thinks he killed the kid and runs off into the desert. And so the kid decides this is going to be his life course, is to try and find that guy and tell him that he's okay. It's a really magnificent book, a really good book. And then let's see, there's another one. Oh, there's a really incredible book. that what was it they were asking? A book that nobody knows about. And there's I don't know if you guys remember Mutiny on the Bounty, Nordhoff and Hall again, and James Hall. Towards the end of his career, decided that he was going to write a book. It was going to be a fiction, and it was going to be funny. It was going to have a sense of humor because he was tired of writing about all these grim mutinies and man-eating cannibals and all this kind of stuff like that. And so he wrote this book. It's called Dr. Dogbody's Leg, is what it's called. Like what it's about is at the beginning of the book, Dr. Dogbody, who was a surgeon for the British Navy during the Napoleonic Wars, or just after the Napoleonic Wars, comes into this tavern in Plymouth, in the southern part of England. Like it goes into this tavern and regales everybody. He's missing a leg, and he comes in and tells everybody this night, about how it was that he lost his leg. And it's a spectacular story, like with all historically accurate and all this incredible story and all this. And then the next one night, he comes into the tavern again and tells another story about how it is that he lost his leg. Only it's a different story. And there are like 10 chapters, and it's like 10 different times, different stories about it as he lost his leg. And then then there was a thing they asked at the end. They were like, okay, if you could, bring 3 authors together and put them at a table, who would you bring? And I looked and saw, what everybody else had done. And there was always like Shakespeare and Dickens, and all of these other authors and stuff. And I just thought, I'm going to try and close it in a little bit, make it more interesting. And so I said, I'm only going to do dead Western writers. That's all I'm going to do. Just dead Western writers. And the first one was Jack Schaefer, who wrote Shane and the Monty Walsh. It's an incredible, incredible writer. Let's see, the other was Walter Van Tilburg Clark, who wrote The Oxbow Incident, Track of the Cat. And then the other one was Dorothy Johnson, who most people don't know about. Do you guys know that the schoolmarm from Missoula is the one who wrote The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, A Man Called Horse? I mean, she was spectacular and incredible. No relation. Spectacular Western writer like that. And there's another one that she wrote that I don't know why somebody hasn't turned it into a movie or done something with. It's called Lost Sister. And what it is, it's about there are 4 sisters like that, and they're coming across the country on this, on one of the crossings like that. And she gets abducted, I think, by either the Crow or the Northern Shore. Maybe it's the Lakota. It's the Lakota. And she gets kidnapped by the Lakota. And 20 years later, they find her and bring her back. And it's all about the attempts to try and reintroduce her, into the family, and into the culture again. So, but I can go on forever. I can even give you little accounts. I mean, the reason why, Henry's bar is called the Red Pony is because of John Steinbeck. You can go through the list and find all kinds of little key elements all the way through like that. But that's one of the joys is the reading part. That's for me, one of the great joys of my life. Whenever I hear somebody wants to be a writer, but they don't read, I'm like, don't do that. You should read. So. Yes, sir. Oh, that's always a joy for me to do. I have to admit, whenever I was writing The Cold Dish, when I was putting that book together, the way it's formed out like that, it's about the conflicts and everything like that between, the mainstream, society and then the native society, which are the two, big, groups of where it is that I am. And so, and the books were also written in Walt's, voice, their first person. And, I'm going to take a little sidetrack just so I can tell you a really good, good story. Richard Russo, you guys know Richard Russo? I wrote Nobody's Fool, at all of those, at Empire Falls. I was on a panel with him at the Tucson Festival of Books, and I had just started. And so I had one book, The Cold Dish. It was written in first person, right? And for some reason, they started off this question from the other end, and there were 6 authors on this panel, and it was is first person a good way of telling a story? And they started trashing first person all the way down. All really big novelists, really big authors, and they're trashing it all the way down as they're coming down through here like that. And Richard Russo had actually read The Cold Dish. He'd read it, and so he knew. I know he knew that I had one book out and it was in first person. They get all the way down to him and he looks at the rest of them, looks out in the audience and goes, "Call me Ishmael." It was like a literary body slam was what it was. I just stood there and went, there you go. I don't have to say anything about that. But with that narrative, and in Walt's voice, and then with Henry being, one of the major components of the story too, the book had a really strong masculine kind of, feel to it and everything. And I thought, you got to balance that out. You've got to try and pull it back more towards the middle. And so what I did was I surrounded Walt with this pride of lionesses. That's what I tend to refer to them as, like that. Because, when I was building all the components of making Walt, I thought, okay, he's going to be a big guy, he's going to be strong, he's going to be smart, he's going to have all these things going for him, and I thought, how can I cripple him, And so I thought, take the most important thing in his life away, his wife, take his wife away from him. The one thing, the most important thing in his life, gets taken away from him. So he's crippled and he's bleeding, he's hurt, at the center of these novels. He's always going to be that way. And so, but he does have this pride of lionesses. All the women in his life are around him and they protect him and take care of him and make sure that he's all right. I mean, you've got Dorothy who puts, his dispatcher who puts the Post-its on the door facing so that when he comes in the morning, he knows what the hell he's doing, because otherwise he'd be out wandering in the streets, not know what he was doing. Then you've got, you've got Dorothy down over the hill that's, got the Busy Bee Cafe, who keeps him fed because, one of these weekends they would run out of frozen food in the jail and he'd starve to death. And then, you've got, is that relationship he's got with his daughter, who is the last thread, the last connection he's got, to keep him, with us. And, but, she's removed. And when the series starts, she's like that from that first book, she's 2,000 miles away. And so it's interesting to see how they negotiate that relationship. And then there's Vic, his second in command. She's one of my favorites too, I have to admit. And, and I thought, okay, if this sheriff is going to be doing investigations, who's going to be doing these investigations with him? And I thought, okay, if the sheriff is male, the undersheriff should be female. If the sheriff is rural, the undersheriff should be urban. If Walt is more knowledgeable about the social implications of the job, he knows, the histories of every family, of the county, of everything. If there's a 78 Chevrolet pickup truck maroon, with a gray primer quarter panel on the left side, he knows who that is. And so he has that advantage. But then again, she also went to the 5th largest police academy in the country. And so she knows more about ballistics and forensics. She's forgotten more about that stuff than he probably will ever know. So it was a kind of a nice balance for those kind of things. Walt is very careful about the kind of language, that he uses in his dealings with people. Vic is too, in a different way, so, and she's a very good contrast because I'm always telling students, that's another thing I do, whenever I'm telling students students get really hung up on the physicality of the characters. They're always they want to tell you, oh, well, they look a little bit, like Katharine Hepburn, but taller, like Kate Blanchett and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, nobody cares, really. I'm always saying, you get to describe a character one time. That's it. At the beginning of that novel, you can give a brief description of what they look like, but it really doesn't matter because you're not going to be able to describe that character over and over and over again. So what does matter is the voice. It's the language that character uses, because that character is going to talk all the way through. And I have to admit, the one that caught me out on it was, how many of you guys listened to the audiobooks? Oh, thank goodness. George Guidall, who I got from Tony Hillerman. Tony Hillerman's the one that gave me him. And I remember whenever he was doing the first audiobook for The Cold Dish, he goes, what's your education, Craig? And I said, I hemmed and hawed a little bit. And he goes, yeah, you can try that I'm just an old cowboy bullshit if you want to. He says, but I've read your book and I know you've got an education. And I said, you know what? I got a couple of different things. I said, my undergraduate was, biological science. I said, but my master's degree was actually in playwriting. And he goes, I knew it. I said, how'd you know? He said, you never use the tag phrases, he said, she said. He said, you always have the character do something physical, like straighten their hat or drum their hands on. It's a physical trait that tells you more than just he said, she said. How many of us have been reading books like that, and we'll be reading along, and there'll be a man and a woman in a room, and then there'll be 27 different he said, she said. By the time you get to the end of the page, I'm like, there are only 2 of them in the room, all right, we can get it from here. But yeah, that's, for me, one of the joys of it, as far as that was concerned, But yeah, I'm trying to think now. I lost the track of the thread of where I was going with that, But yeah, with Vic, I don't ever have to worry about people not knowing who's talking when Vic talks. They know who that is. I mean, there's a reason why Henry doesn't use any contractions, and then Walt's got that kind of a folksy kind of like, homespun philosopher, rural philosopher kind of quality to him. Lonnie Littlebird, the tribal chief of the Northern Cheyenne, like it has, yes, it is so, like that, So all of those characters, for me, the voices become so much more important, and that's where I like to spend my time. Like, I think I answered your question, but I just kind of went off on a tear there a little bit. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Very little. Like, I did a lot of writing is what I did. Like that, I did a lot of writing. And I won a playwriting contest while I was there, which was really kind of a turning point for me, because I thought, this is a pretty prestigious repertory theater. If I can win a playwriting award from this place, maybe I can do this. Because that's really the hard part. When people ask how this question usually starts, is it's always like, did you always want to be a writer? And the answer to that is, yeah, you always want to be a writer, but wanting to be a writer is kind of like wanting to be an astronaut. The odds against you are so great, just don't tell anybody. Just keep it to yourself. And then if it happens, you're like, yep, overnight. Look at that. 30-year overnight success. Yes. Oh, thank you. Oh, absolutely. I live on a ranch in Wyoming. I mean, I had to have a dog. And the dog that I got, like who the dog is based off of, has passed away, because that was like, 20 years ago. And but what happened was I was out there, at the ranch, and I built it myself, because I had a father and an uncle who thought you were slave labor. They had construction companies so they thought that you were slave labor until you escaped. And so I learned how to do, all masonry foundations, rough carpentry work, and rough electricals, plumbing, and all that. And one of the great things about log buildings, you're doing the inside wall at the same time as you're doing the outside wall. That's slick, I got to tell you. It goes a lot faster when you do that. And so anyway, I was out there building that place but I mean, I was by myself. Judy had not come out from Philadelphia at that point in time. She was maybe still waiting to see if this is going to work or not. And so anyway, I'm building the house out there at the ranch, and I'm all by myself. And I thought, I've never had a dog, in my adult life, and I thought, I'm going to get a dog. And so I go into the shelter in Sheridan, drive the 28 miles, get in the shelter. And all the dogs are barking and jumping up and down, making all this noise and everything. And there's this one dog, it's about a 60-pounder, and he's in the back, and he's got his head leaning against, the wall like this. He's just sad looking and all this. And I was I look at the kid that's working there, and I said, well, it must be harder to, get a home for an older dog like that. And he goes, oh no, he's a puppy. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah, and he's going to get the shot tomorrow. And I was like, load him up. Say, load him up. And I take him over to Mike Pilch, my buddy who's a veterinarian there in Sheridan. And he's looking at the dog. He's peeling his lips back and everything like this. And he goes, what kind of dog is this, Craig? And I've got my little sheet that the high schooler had written in, in pencil, for me. And I'm like, he's part German Shepherd, and he's part Labrador, and he's part, and Mike goes, Craig, this dog's got a lot of St. Bernard in him. I was like, oh, crap. He was about 150 pounds by the time he got done growing. And he lived with me while I built that whole house for one entire 4-month period. And we just bonded. I mean, we just connected, and we all think that the animals can understand what we're saying. But I mean, he really, literally, I could, give him instructions like that, and he would literally know what to do and go do it. It was pretty fantastic like that. But the other thing was when I was putting Walt together, I thought to myself, I've got this guy, the sheriff in Wyoming, and basically, he's an armed guy, driving, because there's always going to be driving, whenever you're in Wyoming, you're out west. There's going to be a certain time. He's, I can either have him talk to himself, or I could have him talk to the dog. And I don't know about you guys, but people who are armed, and go around talking to themselves, they worry me, okay? And so I thought, have him talk to the dog. And it actually has turned out to be one of the really great sounding board for all of these monologues, where Walt can start talking to the dog, and and the dog is looking at him and giving him responses and all of that. And I knew that I get two emails. There are two kinds of emails that I get. One is, you beat up on Walt too much. After every book, I get these emails. You beat up on Walt too much in the last book. You need to take better care of him in this next one, which is really kind of nice. They think I'm like God, that I can take care of Walt, make sure he's okay. And then the other one is that, let's see, there was not enough of my favorite character, insert name here. And I get them off every character. It's the ones oh, there wasn't enough Henry in the last book. There wasn't enough Lucian in the last book. There wasn't enough Ruby in the last book. and it goes right down the list. I knew I'd finally gotten to a certain point whenever I started getting emails that said, there really wasn't enough dog in the last book. So all the way back there, yes, you had your hand up quick. You know how you test a good Western name? You put it before a steakhouse, and if it sounds good, then that's a good Western name. That's horrible. I'm sorry. It's a serious question, and I give him that answer. No, it's actually there are two things. One of the things that one of the authors I really do love, but I refused to give him play in the New York Times because I thought everybody else was Dickens. Dickens was really spectacular at giving characters these onomatopoeia names, where you understood the character by simply hearing the name. I mean, when I mention a character by the name of Scrooge, I don't have to describe that character to you. You know what that character is going to be like. And so with Walt, I thought, okay, I took that wife away from him. He's been basically clinically depressed for 4 or 5 years, and I thought, Longmire. That'll be it. That'll be the name. And that's basically how he got that name. Yes, ma'am. You know what? First of all, Lou's not that small. I'll be honest with you. Lou's about 6 foot even, close to 180 pounds or something like that. So he's not that small, which is really a pain in his butt, because I remember when we were there for the first night, there was a get-together, a reception for all the actors and we got to go to it. And I remember there's nothing like having Lou Diamond Phillips walk up to you and go, "Hi, I'm Lou Diamond Phillips, have a beer." And so he hands me this beer, and then he turns around, he looks at Robert Taylor, and he's like, "Shit." And I said, God, you guys have only been together for an hour, and there's already a feud on set. And I looked at him, and I go, "What's the story?" And he goes, "He's 6'4". He says, and everybody in the cast, even Katie is almost 6 feet tall, for goodness sake. Everybody's going to think I'm short again, and I'm not short. And it was so funny because the hotel that we were having the reception in, they had a poster of Young Guns up on the wall. And he goes, come here. And I walk over with him, and he goes, "You see anything about this picture?" And I said, "Yeah, you're the tallest guy there." And he goes, "Yes, and I'm the one that's standing over the hill. Will you look at that?" He said, "I'm at least a foot taller than all these other guys." So he's a little bit anxious about that, But I don't know. For me, the big thing is that what I've discovered is, when you're casting something that somebody has written, the one thing that'll override any kind of physicality at all is, are they a good actor or a good actress? And that's generally what happens. If somebody's really good and they come in and they really want, to do that role, then they get it. And with Lou, it was kind of funny because they had announced these auditions, and he said, "I'll come in and audition." Because generally he doesn't even have to audition anymore. He ran out and he bought the first 3 books in the series and read them before he came in to do the audition. And and when he got the role, it was funny because they had one of the first scenes that they filmed was at the Red Pony Bar and Grill, and the phone, they're filming it and I'm standing over to the side watching, and the phone rings. And Lou walks over and picks it up and says, "Red Pony Bar. It's another beautiful day here at the Red Pony Bar and Grill and continual soiree." And again, Chris Chulak, who was directing it, when they cut it, he goes, "Hey, that's a great improv. Keep that." And Lou looks over at me and goes, "I will." Bastard. But yeah, no, that's a lot of it that. I mean, they're always going to change a little bit, and what you hope is that they stay true to the tone, of the books, or the written material as much as possible. But, I'm of a thought that, that's kind of a group effort, and at the very beginning, I was pretty sure that I wasn't going to step in and try and tell them how to do stuff, because they've been pretty successful in making winning television shows. I don't know if you guys know it or not, but the TV show is still one of the top 10 to 20 shows on Netflix every other week, which is really kind of wild, that I have to admit. So. Yes, sir. You know what? What it is like I said, it's like one of the top 10 and 20 shows on Netflix, pretty much every other week. And you would think that somebody at Warner Brothers would figure out, hey, we've got this show that 6, 7 years after, we stopped production, is still kind of chugging along here that. Maybe we should think about doing some more of that. So I hear those same rumors periodically too, and so we'll see what happens. I know I've got tons more material for them. Like that's not a problem. Okay, so somebody else had their hand up. Like two individuals back here. You first, sir. You in the front. Yep. It really was a situation where I thought to myself, I remember, I'd lived in a couple of big cities, but I had also worked as a cowboy in Montana and Wyoming, and I thought, that's where I wanted to be more than anything. And there really isn't very much of a theatrical, bent out there, on the high plains like it. And so I thought, if you're going to try and write, you're going to have to like switch over and try and do narrative writing. You're going to have to try and write a novel is what you're going to have to try and do. And at the time, it's interesting, like at least it was to me, like everything in crime fiction here about 20 years ago was very noir. Everything was all like, alcoholic divorced detectives burying bodies in the alley behind, their houses and things like that. And I thought, people I know in law enforcement are really good people, work really hard, and make incredible sacrifices like to do the job. What if you did the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state? That would be something very, very different, from what anybody's done before. And that was The Cold Dish. That was the very first book. From then on, it was kind of off to the races at that point in time, I have to admit. Now, the guy behind you, yes, sir. Well, more importantly, they really kind of, Warner Brothers, after they did 63 episodes of Longmire, really kind of have control over Walt Longmire. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't do other things. I've got a couple of other novels that I've started, and even another television series, that's a potential for another mystery series that I've got started too, like that. But yeah, I kind of have to play in Warner Brothers' sandbox from here on out, which is not the worst thing in the world. They're one of the biggest studios in the world, so we'll see what happens.
I think we have time for one more question.
One more, okay. If I make them quick, who's got? Okay, I see you've got one. Yes, yeah. Oh yeah. Well, a lot of that came from The Cold Dish in the first novel, like that. The one thing that's left behind every time that one of these guys is murdered, like that, is an eagle feather. Which is kind of where that idea came from. So that was a kind of a quick one. Let's do two more here real quick. Yes, I do. I've got a couple of different things I'm working on. One, I'll tell you about one of them. One is I bought a cabin. I found a cabin. It was built in 1896 up in the Bighorn Mountains. And I bought it but it was weird looking like that. It had one great big room, a little kitchen attached to it, and two doors on either side, and a great big cooler that ran along the whole building on one side. And it was a weird construction like it. And so I asked, the woman who was the realtor, and I said, "What's the story on this?" She goes, "Oh, this is Lodge 34." And I said, "What's that?" She goes, "It's Lodge 34 of the National Order of Cowboy Rangers." And she said, there used to be this social group, kind of like the Elks, the Eagles and all that. And it was all for ranchers and cowboys. And basically it was so they could get group rates for burials is what they could do. But all the cowboys, and all these ranchers were all members of the National Order of Cowboy Rangers. And she goes, Lodge 34 is actually kind of infamous. And I was like, why is that? And she said, well, back in 1917, when Buffalo Bill Cody died in Denver, and his wife and his sister got together and gave the body basically to the state of Colorado so they could bury him down there, the American Legion of Wyoming put up a $5,000 reward for the return of the body of Buffalo Bill. And supposedly on that dark night in 1917, while the world was at war, over in Europe like that, 4 riders left out from Lodge 34 in the Bighorn Mountains to go down and retrieve the body of Buffalo Bill and bring it back to Wyoming. And as the legend goes, they got as far as Cheyenne, Wyoming, where they were overtaken by strong mineral spirits and loose-moraled women. But what if they did make it? And so that's my period Western I'm working on. It takes place in 1917. Because it's that really interesting period in time, because there are Model Ts out driving up and down the road, the horse is an antique at that point, for goodness sake. And so these guys, they probably fought with Teddy Roosevelt, on Cuba, because they actually did that. At the National Order of Cowboy Rangers actually, wrote a letter to Woodrow Wilson and said, we can provide you with 20,000 armed, men on horseback. He didn't mention the fact that they were all 70 or 80 years old. And so, and that's the other thing is these guys would be 70, 80 years old. And it's their last hurrah. And so it's got all of these aspects of it that I really love. It's a period Western in a time of change. It's some guys that are on their last hurrah to get something done. It's a heist, for goodness sake. You're stealing the body of maybe the most eminent American at that period in time ever, who's being held, in the armory right there in the middle of Denver. And so it's got all kinds of wild stuff that I really want to work on. I hate to be one of those people that talk, to themselves, but I don't know. I mean, for me, they're just, whenever I hear a story I'm always just off to the races at that point in time. I'm just like, well, what if this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then that happened, and it's a great way to do it. I'll tell you guys one more quick little story to finish up with, and then I'll let you go. Let the poor library folks go back home. Let's see, which one do I want to tell you about? I was talking about that quote from Wallace Stegner on writing and teaching fiction, and about how everybody uses real people in their books, but just don't admit to it. And so when I finished the first book in the series, at the Cold Dish, for those of you who are would-be writers, your family are the ones you're going to torture first with your writing. I will go ahead and warn you about that now. But what happened was, I had that manuscript for the Cold Dish, and it was like 650 pages long. It was like War and Peace in Absaroka County was what it was like. And so I sent it off to my brother, and I sent it off to my mother and father, and they got it. And I think I waited a full 48 hours before I started badgering them with whether or not they had read it or not. So I called up my brother and I said, "Hey, have you read that manuscript I sent over?" And he goes, "Yeah, I have, and you're dead." I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Craig, the old sheriff that Walt goes and plays chess with on Tuesday nights, Lucian Connolly, that's our dad." I was like, "Crap, I thought I hid that really well." He goes, no. He looks like Dad. He acts like Dad. He talks like Dad. And the only thing he did was cut off one of his legs. And I don't think that's going to fool Dad. So I said, "I got to go." And he goes, "I bet you do." I hung up with him. I call home. My mother was the first one to answer the phone. And I said, "Mom, have you guys read that manuscript I sent over?" And she goes, "Oh, honey, I'm halfway through. It's so good." She's my mom. What you going to say, right? And I said, "Has Dad read any of the manuscript?" She goes, "Oh, he's about 2/3 of the way through. He's almost going to finish it by tomorrow sometime." And I was like, "Yeah, he's definitely read the Lucian parts." And so I'm thinking, how am I going to ask this question, right? And so that's when my mom comes back on and she goes, "Honey, your father thinks he's Walt Longmire." Now, if you've read my books, or even if you've just seen the TV show, you know how far apart those two characters are, right? And so I'm trying to think of what I'm going to say next. And she comes back on there again and she goes, "Let's not disabuse him of that thought, shall we?" Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. You've been a lovely audience. And thanks for being here at the Wright Free Library, too.